Hey everyone, and welcome to the LRW Virtual Conference 2020. We're so happy that you are joining us here today, and we have a great session. My name is Michelle Malsky, and I'm your Director at Large here with the LRW Network. Today we're going to be listening to a presentation called Railroading 101. Before we get started, I'm going to do a couple of housekeeping items here with you so that we all understand this platform that we're using. So the first thing is a little bit about our audio. So you've probably joined in using your computer speaker system, which is fine. But at any point, if you have some speaker issues, feel free to just click onto the audio tab, let it expand, and click on the telephone option. That way it'll give you the information that you may need to dial in. Just make sure you mute your computer if that's so to avoid any kind of feedback. Now we want to hear from each and every one of you, and there's a lot. So unfortunately for this, you are all muted, but that doesn't mean you don't have a voice, and we would love to hear from you. We have an opportunity at the end in which we would be doing a question and answer session. And so if you have any questions or comments that you would like to have either during the presentation or after, feel free to use that box on the lower right-hand corner that says chat or questions. So just type in your questions right there, and we will answer those when time permits, as well as you please use the chat option and function as well if you'd like to address the whole group or make any general comments. So without any further ado, I just want to make one quick note about our code of conduct. And of course, as with every conference, please just be considerate of our speakers and respect all participants that are presenting or maybe in the attendee group with you as well. So without further ado, I would love to share with you our session's host. And today we have with us Miranda Cross from Global Rail Account Manager from Cummins Incorporated. So with that, Miranda, the floor is yours.
Great. Hi, can everybody see my webcam open? Can you hear me?
Unfortunately, I can't see your beautiful face, Miranda.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine.
Okay.
I can hear you.
So sorry about that. I've been having technical issues, but so everybody, thank you so much for attending our session today. This session has been made possible by the LRW virtual conference sponsors. We've got a great speaker today. Very excited to have her with us, and I'm sure that everybody here is going to take a little bit away, even if you're a rail expert to a rail novice. There are some nuggets for everybody in today's session. So with that, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Connie Nordhus-Bieber. She's the co-founder of Railway Advantage Solutions and Vice President of Value Solutions at 4Atmos Technologies. She has spent over 30 years specializing in financial management and analysis with expertise in business case development, market and sales, project management, continuous improvement, operations, auditing, and problem solving. Connie has pretty much done it all. She has over 25 years within the rail industry and has spent 10 years working for Union Pacific Railroad and a combined 15 years experience working for R.J. Corman, Siemens, Relco, and Wytronics. Connie received her Bachelor of Science in Accounting and Business Administration from Creighton University and also obtained a Certified Public Accounting Certificate. Connie is the current vice chair of the Locomotive Software and Systems Committee for the LMOA. I'm very pleased to welcome Connie Nordhus-Bieber as our speaker today. Welcome, Connie.
Thank you, Miranda. That was a very nice intro. And welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I was honored to be asked to do this. And I do hope that I'm able to share something new with you and not just little known nor cared about facts that my husband always throws out there. So what I'm going to start, I'm going to go over a little bit of an agenda, and I'm going to talk about the rail history, railroad authorities, railroad classifications. I'm going to talk a little bit about passenger rail, but I'm probably not going to focus on that because that's the least bit of experience that I have. And then I'm going to talk about the freight train as a whole, locomotives and cars, track, signaling, and yards, because they're very critically important too. Safety, which is the number one important aspect of railroading, and then technology and how much it's brought the railroads along in the railroading as it is today. So we'll start with that U.S. history of railroads, and I'm not going to talk a lot about, national railroads, because I don't know that much about Australia and all of those either. So John Stevens is actually considered the father of the American Railroad. He was granted the first railroad charter in North America in 1815. And in 1826, he had this huge estate in Hoboken, New Jersey, where he demonstrated the feasibility of the first steam locomotive. And then in 1830, the Baltimore and Ohio opened its first 14 miles of track. Then in 1887, Congress passed the Interstate Commerce Act, which established the ICC to regulate what very quickly was becoming the booming rail industry and the monopolies that were starting to control the rails. By 1917, can't believe that's over 100 years ago already, there were 1,500 US railroads operating around 254,000 miles of track and employing 1.8 million people. From 1928 to 1933, as many of us know, if you're as old as I am, there was the Great Depression that devastated the railroads and the rail industry. Revenue fell in the rail industry about 50%. And in 1970, the Rail Passenger Service Act created Amtrak. And Amtrak, what that did is it actually relieved the freight railroads from most of their huge losses that they were incurring doing passenger service. What was the big thing that really helped the rail industry was 40 years ago, last week, October 14th, the Staggers Rail Act. It allowed railroads to be less government regulated, and they were able to act and set their own rates in the private economy. So they could set their own rates, market-based prices for their services, and it actually caused rail rates on average to be 43% lower now today than they were in 1981. So the Staggers Rail Act really saved the railroads. So then we get into the Transcontinental Railroad, as I'm sure you've all heard. In 1853, the Army Appropriations Act set out to map/survey the railroad east-west routes to the Pacific. And there was a fifth north and south survey so that you could connect California, Oregon, and Washington. In 1860, Theodore Judah, he was an engineer for the Sacramento Valley Railroad. He became obsessed with the railroads and the desire to become rich and build the Transcontinental Railroad. So he approached a bunch of leading Sacramento merchants, and they created the Central Pacific Railroad. And they started the construction of 690 miles eastward toward Promontory Point from Sacramento. The Western Pacific Railroad built 132 miles from Oakland near San Francisco out to Sacramento. And then the Union Pacific built 1,085 miles westward from Council Bluffs, Omaha, Nebraska area. Then on May 10th, 1869, the Golden Spike was driven to create the Pacific Railroad in Promontory Point, Utah.
As a kid, I had the opportunity to go out to Promontory Point and see a mock Golden Spike that was there. Where is the actual Golden Spike residing today?
You can actually see the Golden Spike today if you visit the UP Railroad Museum in Council Bluffs, Iowa. If anybody's interested, I suggest the UP Railroad Museum. It's got so much great, fantastic information. Of course,
right,
me being
somewhat
of a foamer, it should be on your list. I don't know if anybody knows, I learned this when I started at Union Pacific, but the standardization of the time zones came from the railroads. In 1883, all the representatives from the major U.S. railways got together for the General Time Convention, where they adopted a proposal to establish 5 time zones. Of course, we had the Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific, and at the time they come up with an intercontinental, which is now the Atlantic. So November 18th, 1883, the U.S. Naval Observatory sent out a telegraph that signaled marking of the 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in railway offices across the United States, because at the time you would go from, say, Council Bluffs, Iowa, sorry, I live in Nebraska, to Omaha, Nebraska, and their clocks, one would say 12 o'clock and one would say 12:03. So that's what the standardization did in 1883 by the U.S. Naval Observatory. And then in 1918, Congress passed legislation recognizing the standard time zone system and also instituting the daylight savings time, which all my entire life growing up as a farm girl, everybody that was not a farm person always blamed it on the farmers for having daylight savings time. But that's not the case.
I've always thought it was because the farmers needed to get out there earlier.
It was actually to conserve resources for World War I. So I found that somewhat interesting, that we didn't have to blame my dad and other farmers any longer. It was World War I.
Yeah,
so
the Midwest is now safe.
What was that?
I said the Midwest is okay. We're safe. We didn't cause it.
But if you're like me, you would want that to go away, because I hate this coming up in October where we have to set the clocks back and it's dark when you go to work and it's dark when you come home from work.
Yeah.
I'm done with that. So onward, thought I'd share with you a few of the railroad authorities. Now, I could not list all of them, and I don't know all of them. But the first one was the Interstate Commerce Commission, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, that was established in 1887. And it actually designated all the railroad classifications in 1911. However, they were dissolved in 1996, and now it's the Surface Transportation Board that took its place. And they now define the new criteria for railroads classes, and they're responsible for the economic regulatory oversight, rates, services, mergers. So when like the Union Pacific and the C&W and the SP all merged, and the Burlington Northern and the Atchison Topeka Santa Fe merged, and the CP, or I should say the CSX and the NS took over the Conrail, and those merged. That was all overseen by the Surface Transportation Board. Then in 1913, there was the SLRA, the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association. It's hard sometimes for me to say ASLRRA. I always screw it up. I say ASLLRA, but always remember it's the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association. They're primarily an industry trade group that lobbies for the Class 2 and 3 railroads, which we will define here in a little bit. And then in 1934, you've got the AAR, the American Association of Railroads, and it's primarily the first class railroad representatives that lobbies for the Class 1 railroads. Then we've got in 1936, Transport Canada. We have to bring up our neighbors to the north, Transport Canada. They're much like the FRA, which wasn't established until 1966. But they do safety, security, railway operating certificates, and incident reporting and investigations. Much like the FRA, which enforces the rail safety regulations. There are some that look at the FRA as kind of like a state police, because they can give fines. But again, the most important thing is the safety of our employees at the railroads and others that interact with the railroads. In 1962, President Kennedy sent out a major transportation message to Congress and allied for a program of federal capital assistance for mass transportation. If you'll remember earlier, I said in history, railroads were starting to really fall apart and they were filing bankruptcy. But Kennedy was like, we need to help out passengers. We need to conserve and enhance values in existing urban areas and provide essential assistance so there are livability areas and future development. It was important to the national welfare of the United States of America. So he pushed and pushed. Unfortunately, he died before it was enacted, but Lyndon Johnson then passed the Urban Mass Transit Act in July of 1964 and established the Federal Transit Administration. So now we can talk about the railroad classifications. There are 7 U.S. Class 1 freight railroads. They are classified as a Class 1 if they make greater than $504.8 million in annual operating revenue. Now, this is based on inflation, so it was a much lower number at one time, and then it'll adjust on an annual basis. So this was based in 2019 annual operating revenues. And those 7 in the US are BNSF, UP, KCS, Canadian National, and Canadian Pacific, CSX, and the NS.
Connie, didn't Class 1s, 2s, and 3s used to be rated based on the track ownership?
It was revenue and track ownership, but as tracks retired and changed hands, and there were all of the mergers, they made it more of just an annual operating revenue measurement. And all the Class 1s actually account for 69% of the track in the US and 90% of the railroad employees and about $74 billion in annual revenue. It's a lot of money.
Definitely. And it
When we go
sounds
down to
like,
the class,
I was going to say, it sounds like,
yeah, sorry.
given the right revenue, you could have Class 3s become 2s and 2s become 1s, et cetera, right?
That is true. And that what has happened and changed throughout the years. When railroads get picked up or they start making more revenue, like a Class 2 revenue is less than the 504.8, right? But more than 40.4 million. So if a Class 3 would start making more than 40.4 million in annual revenue, then they would be designated as a Class 2. And in 2019, there were 21 Class 2 railroads, and each of them averaged about 350 route miles or so. The Class 1 railroads on average have well over 13,000 route miles, and the 2 larger Class 1s have over 30,000 route miles. Then as we were saying, the Class 3 railroads, they're, and sorry, I didn't mean to offend anybody that might be listening. I could not fit 500 some short line logos on this one slide. So I just selected a portion. I tried to go alphabetically. And again, these make less than 40.4 million annual operating revenues. And they include the switching and terminal railroads, which there could be quite a few of the terminal railroads that are actually jointly owned by one or more other railroads, and their purpose is transferring cars. So like there's the Indiana Harbor Belt, the Belt Railway of Chicago. They are owned by multiple Class 1 railroads, and then they transfer cars from one mover to another. In interest of time, sorry, I'm going a little lengthy on some of these. I want to say a little bit about passenger rail. Again, this is not my expertise. As I'm guessing many of you know, heavy rail or rapid transit, they're commonly called metros, because they're short for metropolitans, right? They're often a full grade separation from other traffic, including even other rail traffic. Like a rapid transit heavy rail would be an example with a New York subway or the Chicago L. And they're just like on diesel in Amtrak is passenger rail, heavy rail. They're mostly diesel electric locomotives, and then light rail is actually electric. They're overhead catenary lines. And light rail is then different from commuter rail, because actually commuter rail shifts back to mostly diesel electric locomotives. I know they're kind of hard for me to keep track of, but then commuter rail is regulated by the Federal Railroad Administration, and light rail is regulated by the Federal Transit Authority. So try and keep those straight. Good luck, because I have a tough time myself. And then of course, cable cars. And what I like about the cable cars is there's a cable actually between the rails that pull the cars along of average about 9 miles per hour. So they're much slower, obviously, than other transportation cars. And then the trolley systems, I think everybody's heard of the San Francisco trolleys. And they're again, catenary electric, managed overhead by electric wires.
And what happens to be the largest passenger route, or what's the longest passenger route out there?
Oh, that would happen to be the Amtrak Zephyr line. Goes from Chicago out to California. It's about 2,400 miles long.
Wow, that's pretty long. About probably a 3 or 4 day trip, I'd imagine.
Nice ride.
Yeah.
I hear that Via Rail in Canada is really beautiful ride. So a little bit about Union stations. It's where multiple lines come together. The first one, the first city in the world to devise a Union station was Indianapolis. And they came up with it in 1848, but it wasn't built until 1854. So Columbus, Ohio is really granted the first Union Station building in the world. And then again, the Indianapolis, Ohio, or Indianapolis, Indiana, of course. Sorry, Ohio.
Hey, we get that mixed up all the time if you're from Indiana and Ohio, right?
Well, since I'm in the Big Ten, yeah, I definitely don't normally confuse those two. So in Columbus, Ohio, it didn't really, it tenanted out to another road, but it owned all of the roads that were coming in. So Indianapolis was different because it had different lines that were coming in and meeting with passengers instead of just one. And that's how that made that different. And then in 1865 for passenger rail, I think everybody's heard of Pullman cars. If you haven't, you need to see these cars. He was known for these luxury sleeping cars, and then they became called Pullman cars because he gave one of the sleepers to the funeral train for Abraham Lincoln. And then that's when they became the Pullman cars in his honor. 1971, I think that we'd said earlier, Amtrak was created by an act of Congress to assume the operation of the national network of passenger trains so that it could give the private railroads more money as they were starting to really go bankrupt at that time, and it saved them lots and lots of money, along with the Sadler's Act, as we talked about earlier, that implemented in 1980.
So Connie, just a quick little history tidbit back to the Union Station in Indianapolis. So the station is not operating as a rail station any longer. The Crown Plaza has set up a hotel in the station, and they actually have Pullman cars on site that you can rent as hotel rooms and stay there. So if you're in Indianapolis, maybe even next year, take a look at the Crown Plaza and book yourself a Pullman car to stay.
Yeah, that would be exciting. I'd like to try that out. I'm going to look into it. Hopefully we're traveling by then,
Exactly.
please. Ready to get back on the road myself. So we're going to, this was one of my pet peeves for the longest time because I used to sell locomotives. And anybody I would say that to, they're like, you sell trains? I'm like, no, I do not sell trains. I sell the locomotive. Well, there's some terminology and people sometimes interchange engine and locomotive. That's also sometimes a pet peeve of mine because the engine is what makes the locomotive run on the tracks, right? It's the big diesel electric, it's the big diesel engine that operates the locomotive. So a train is made up of an engine or multiple locomotives, the locomotive consist, and then coupled with the cars. So that's the whole train consist. And in order to make up the train, which are run by air brakes, you need something at the end, which used to be the caboose, and the front, which was the locomotive or the headlights on the locomotive, which the locomotive also has a head of train device. In 1969, the Florida East Coast was attributed with the first end of train device, which replaced the caboose. And the end of train device, when I was at Union Pacific, there were a few guys that referred to it as a FRED, which was flashing rear end device, but they didn't use the word flashing. Shame, shame, shame. In Canada, it's called the Sense and Braking Unit, or an SBU. By the late 70s, the caboose was pretty much headed toward extinction. And by 1980s, ETDs, or end of train devices, were used pretty much US-wide and Canada-wide.
Hey, Connie, we got a question that came in from our audience asking, is it common for some railroads to have both light and commuter lines? For instance, Metra in Chicago has an electric line, but some of their other lines are pulled by an engine.
Yeah, it is. It does happen. Like Metrolinx Go Transit in Toronto has the same thing. There are different lines. One would be like a light rail, and one would be considered a commuter rail. So commuter rails go more out into the urban areas, and then the light rail is usually more in the heavy metropolitan areas, like in downtown Chicago, downtown New York, etc. So they can have both.
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question. There, just back on the freight train just a little bit, that the average line haul train length is like 6,500 feet or 1.25 miles, which can be 3 to 4 locomotives or 70 cars. The Union Pacific several years ago ran a 3.5 mile train that had 9 locomotives and I forget how many cars, but that's a long train. And I'm sure it was mostly out west where there are fewer crossings. I don't see one of those happening in the near future along a metropolitan area. I think there'd be some very upset drivers. So locomotives that make up the train, right? They're approximately 32,000. The steam locomotive was first built in 1802. As stated earlier, John Stevens actually proved the use of a steam locomotive on his personal property. 1936, General Motors Electromotive Corporation started the production of the first diesel electric switch engine. And then in 1938, they really noticed the performance of their engine, the 567 model, in passenger locomotives. So they really wanted to build it out into the switch and freight market. And then 3 years later, Alco and GE introduced a road switcher that occupied its own market niche along with the EMD's F-Series locomotives. for mainline freight service. But with the World War II in the 1940s, petroleum crisis, 1942 and 43, the actual diesel locomotive didn't really take action until the 50s and 60s. And that was late 60s is when the last steam locomotive was used in freight revenue service.
Connie, just another quick question back on the caboose. So one of our attendees is a little bit confused with the term end of train device, asking if it's the same as caboose or is it something completely different?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have. So the caboose was a car. It was a car with a desk in it that was built into caboose so that the electricians, not the electricians, sorry about that, so that the conductors and the guys that had to walk the trains and make sure all the air hoses were connected and that it was good to go, they would climb on to that car and then they would do their paperwork there and make sure that the train stayed. So it's essentially a car. Now
A rolling office per se.
yes, a rolling office. And it actually came from the German word Caboose, that was essentially a that that meant a rolling office, essentially.
Yeah.
So sorry, I got a
There you
little
go.
mixed up there. But the electronic, the end of train device is, it's about 5 to 20 pounds. I mean, the electronics and technology are so improving, right? And it's got, it senses the air in the air brakes, and it sends a signal by radio wave up to the head of train device in the locomotive to say that the air is set right and it is okay. Because it is connected to the angle cock at the end of the train, and it senses the air brakes are good.
Great.
Modern
Connie,
technology.
I think just from a time standpoint, we probably need to move on a little bit.
Okay. Yep. Sorry about that, everyone. Just quickly, freight cars, there's about 1.5 million in the US, primarily 7 categories. The important one is the intermodal car. Probably it moves the most traffic and it keeps our economy going. And the full stack trains, the double stack trains that moves your TV from California to New York and across to Omaha and Indianapolis and Ohio. And how to get that there, because as you might know, no one line goes from California or Washington or Oregon all the way to New York or Miami or Jacksonville, Florida. So you have two ways of getting there. There's trackage rights and there's haulage rights. So with haulage rights, the first one would be 2 railroads establish one rate from Jacksonville, say, to San Francisco. And then one of those railroads would bill it out and they would get paid by the customer, and then that road would break it out in interline settlement to the other roads that participated in that move. The other method, which is trackage rights, the one road would move it the whole way. They'd be responsible for the locomotives and the crews in moving it, and then the trackage rights that they have are really called a joint facility. Since we're 12:35, should we skip the signaling and get directly to our safety and technology? Did I lose you, Miranda?
No, I'm still here. Yeah, why don't we do that? Because I know we have a couple questions from our
Okay.
audience as well.
Well, let's get straight to the point. Let's, technology today, where we're at, the smart sensors, the big data, the drones that are inspecting bridges, PTC, positive train control, so you can automatically stop the train in time. And then eventually, which most of the class 1 railroads are thinking we're going to get to automatic train operations. And that's where, kind of like the trains will be operated like a Tesla self-driving car, and we can stop the train in time, we can avoid running into vehicles, and there's just so many computers that are running the signals in the track, running the signals on the locomotive, and we will have self-driving trains. And it is the safest form of moving commodities. So we're in the 21st century. Global supply chain is moving every hour, every day. There's 1.1 million jobs that are created by the railroads. We strengthen the economy. We deliver global competitiveness. We provide affordable freight transport. We sustain jobs. Railroaders are essential workers. There are more essential workers like doctors and nurses, but railroaders are the top of the essential workers. Sorry for taking over our time.
You're good, Connie. I mean, you think about just all of the goods, especially under the circumstances we're in today. And, you and I had spoken earlier about the toilet paper shortage and, where would our stores be without the railroad and the economy it brings. So good points, definitely. So we can go ahead. As I mentioned before, we have some questions that have come in, and please feel free, if you have any others, to send those in as well. So one of the questions I received is with regards to consolidation. So the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of consolidation with regards to locomotive manufacturers, as well as with class 2s and class 3s emerging, combining. So do you see further consolidation happening for the future?
Man, that's a tough question. Back when I worked at Union Pacific, and even 10 years ago, everybody was talking about, yes, we have the Transcontinental Railroad, but that's just Union Pacific or BNSF that goes from, like, say, Chicago to the West Coast. You would have to connect to the CSX or NS. I hate to say this, but I think it's going to be dependent upon politics, because the Surface Transportation Board is a political branch. So it'll depend upon whether they allow that, the full, like an NS, to connect to a Union Pacific or merge. I do think that there will be further consolidations. It's like the Genesee and Wyoming owns 120 class 2, class 3 railroads and switching terminals. Watco Companies owns 47, 48. Union Pacific was CNW, Southern Pacific, Missouri Pacific, Katy, Western Pacific, and they're all one Union Pacific. So will more happen? I believe so. But I don't quote me as to whether it will for sure or not.
There's a lot of things going on today with big data and the PTC and cloud and information sharing. But another aspect is with regards to the power of the locomotives and some changes that we're seeing in the industry today. Do you predict that hydrogen cells are ever going to fuel a locomotive here in the US?
Well, there are actually a couple locomotives right now that are hydrogen cell, or they're multiple. They can be diesel or hydrogen. There's the diesel battery, right? There's the liquid gas
LNG
locomotives also.
Mm-hmm.
LNG, yeah. I don't know that they'll be prevalent, but given, the potential Green New Deal and looking at new ways, I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime, but I do think that there will be more of them. There is always new technology. And I think, especially because tier 4, then there'll be tier 5, and getting greener and greener and greener, we have to find those new ways to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, and if you look over in Europe, I mean, they are running hydrogen fuel cell trains for passenger and testing right now. So I think it's only a matter of time to see what that new technology coming over here into the States.
And it's the electrification, but then we realize that actually the electrification, you have to burn fuel to get to the electrification. So
exactly, people tend to forget about that.
The electrification is also, I mean, it's extremely expensive. So will we get there? Certain lines are.
Yeah, definitely makes sense in certain places for sure.
Yep.
All right, another question. As who I consider my go-to expert for rail, do you have any books to recommend on rail basics, like car types, track types? I mean, there was so much that we couldn't get to. I mean, we didn't even touch on like maintenance of way.
My goodness.
So if you have any books that you would recommend.
This is really sad, but I was given a book when I started at Union Pacific in the management development program, and they gave me Railroading 101, what it is, what it does. And there's a lot of information in there, but it's really old now. Again, aging myself. But there are quite a few out there. I don't have any off the top of my head. I just,
well, if you think about
technology of the computer, Google everything. And if I come up with them, I'll throw one out there.
Yeah, let us know, and we can send that information out for sure.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Any other questions from our audience out there? We've got a couple minutes left before we need to close this session and get ready for our next session. Any hands raised? Okay, so it looks like we don't have any more questions for today. So Connie, thank you so much. I think we probably needed like 2 hours or 2.5 hours to get through all the information, but the slides and the presentation will be available for everybody. No, that's fine. It was great information. So again, thank you so much for giving us your time here today. Also want to thank everybody for attending today's session, and I'm going to turn it over to one of our LRW leaders now to close out today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Hello. Hi. Sorry about the delay there. Thank you so much again for attending. I am Patricia Baswell, the LRW Events Chair. I want to just kind of give you a quick reminder that we are going to have our 2021 annual conference in Indianapolis. So please save the date. We hope to see you there. And we are going to be doing that in conjunction with RSI, the RSI show in September. So please, we hope to see you there as well. And a reminder that we encourage you to join the LRW and attend our annual membership meeting also in September, right before the show. And lastly, special thanks to our corporate sponsors who helped us make this great session happen today. Thanks again for joining. Have a great rest of your day and see you again tomorrow. And by the way, there's also a yoga class happening in the morning. So if you need a picker-upper in the morning, please do join that. Thank you and take care.